Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.
Good evening and welcome to Windows on the World. I think we're live at last. We've had a few problems here. We were going to set ourselves up in the big studio, but as usual, it's a wing and a prayer. But we are here live from sunny Southend. I'm with somebody very important tonight. Yes, Tony Hurst. He's the chap who helped me set up Windows on the World live. Well, about a year ago now, wasn't it? Probably longer. When was it, Tony? Do you remember?
I've got no idea, Mark. Time flies so fast. It's a bit of a joke.
Well, it is really, yeah. I mean, we've had a couple of attempts at going live. We had it all set up, you see. It's all studio-tastic, but we've ended up doing it on a wing and a prayer again. So hopefully people can hear us now, and Tony can get into chat. But the only problem I've got is my laptop with everything is on the other side of the room. So I'll just, Tony's going to get it, and we are set up. Yeah, it's very interesting at the moment what's happening with the yellow vests, and we're going to get into that because there's great opportunities here, but also huge potential problems as people jump on the bandwagon. You know those people who jump on the bandwagon, the subversives, the lobbying groups, and the people who are going to take things over for their own ends. So we've got quite a lot of that to get into. And this year has been great actually because we've taken our show, The Bigger Picture, on the road, and it's been really successful and very encouraging because we've met so many interesting people who are listening to the shows and actually doing interesting stuff, because the main thing about this is actually getting out there and doing things, you know, actually having these small effects which become quite large in the bigger scheme of things. So, yeah, I'm going to start off now with what we were actually going to get into this evening. Going to get a bit closer to this microphone, but yeah, I think we're sorted now, ready to go. So, it was Socrates who said, "When the debate is lost, slander becomes the tool of the losers," which means, in actual fact, that we're winning, but the slander is off the charts. We've had a lot of that this year, and it is the tool of the enemy. But it doesn't seem like it that we are winning sometimes, because we look at everything being presented through the fake news and the media, which dominates most conversation. Now, the biggest narrative controller on the planet is Google. And this is from Russia Insider. I thought I'd start off the show with this. Google chief executive Sundar Pichai parried US lawmakers Tuesday over complaints of political bias and intrusive data collection as the internet giant came under heavy criticism from conservatives, it says here. "We build our products in a neutral way," he said in one exchange with a lawmaker, and added later, "We approach our work without any political bias." Now that's absolutely laughable, and you can just count how many people have been kicked off YouTube for a start, and the bias that Google uses is incredible, and we're going to get into that a bit tonight as well. I mean, there are other platforms, but they're just nothing like as big at the moment, and it's great that people are finding different places to go. I think this Spreaker platform that we use is absolutely brilliant, and I've had it set up now for quite a long time, and it goes straight out onto Spreaker, YouTube, we go onto Facebook, onto Twitter. It puts it everywhere, which is brilliant, and the figures that we're getting on the Spreaker platform are really, really encouraging. In fact, much better than YouTube. So there you go. Maybe there is an alternative to Google, but this has been proved not to be true, this idea of Google not having political bias. When listening to their top brass, and their bias towards Democrats are all things globalist. And that's something we've covered a lot this year. The shutting down of free speech, the corridor of accepted opinion, the narrow corridor of accepted opinion. That has been a complete problem for us. We're just hanging on at YouTube, but we have had strikes over quite minor things really. And these in other words, your whole library can get taken down with one deletion from YouTube. So we don't want to be dependent on that. So do please subscribe to us on Spreaker, which is where you're listening to us now. It carries on here. This guy from Google, Pichai, was called to the House Judiciary Committee following a series of attacks by President Donald Trump and his supporters, claiming that Google and other internet platforms were suppressing so-called conservative voices. Well, I don't think we should even use the word conservatives. I think it's from a conservative website. Well, they're suppressing anything that isn't part of a globalist agenda. That's basically the best way of putting it. Now, they're deleting anyone who is not part of the agenda, and those who listen to our shows know how Google overstepped the mark. They certainly do. The global community is only for certain lobbyists, and no one will be left behind. So the UN Migration Pact and the Replacement Migration Plan is now also coming under fire. This has come up today. There was a demonstration yesterday, I think, in Brussels, and it's the people who are the yellow vests in Brussels are actually demonstrating against this UN Migration Pact, which I think originally it was going to be banned. Basically, so it's coming under fire, this UN Migration Pact, by all those who live in their own countries. So Brussels hosted this anti-UN Migration Pact demonstration despite threats to ban it, which is quite interesting. So on social media, it says here, around 45,000 people showed their interest in the march against the pact that makes migration a human right. Officials in Brussels fear the manifestation could spread to other parts of the city, and therefore the mayor made the decision to prohibit it. However, it does look as though it did go ahead. Now, it says here, we thought the decision was made because of the terror attacks in Strasbourg on the Christmas market. This was last year. But the problem doesn't seem to be the safety of the protesters, but their right to unite and freedom of speech, March organiser Philip Brausman says. There were a few who attacked riot police. It's quite interesting, this. And they got the better of the situation. The riot police actually retreated. But this looked like a group that was set up as a bunch of agent provocateurs. So, as this shows, broadcasting from sunny Southend, we'll take a little digression, bring Tony back to the conversation because he had to move over the other side of the room. So, yeah, we've done a lot of Windows on the World shows, and you took a bit of a break. You're doing your own thing now, and everything's going quite well. So, I haven't spoken to you for a while, Tony. So, what have you got to say? What's actually happening, and what can you see happening at the moment?
I see hypocrisy, I see division, I see major global climate issues and weather changes, all sorts of things that you've been talking about for a long time really quite coming to a head. One of the biggest things, well, I'll just tell people what I'm up to at the minute. We're making Run from the Cure 2, a documentary. Rick Simpson, many people will know of him and his work with cannabis oil and the medicine. And one of the little documentaries that I shall be bringing out soon is about the hypocrisy that we've got in the British government with cannabis as medicine. And we've got Theresa May and many previous Prime Ministers telling us clearly that cannabis isn't medicine. It has no medicinal value. But on the other side of that, Theresa May's husband is a major shareholder in GW Pharmaceuticals, and they are the UK's biggest exporter of medical cannabis. In fact, they are the world's biggest exporter of medical cannabis, and that major bit of hypocrisy has never been exposed by our mainstream media. I don't get how that something as major as this, something that affects everybody's lives, because there's nobody out there that hasn't been affected by cancer, I'm pretty sure of that, and yet our media lets that run. Is it medicine or isn't it? This is what I see as a major chink in the armour of government's connection with Big Pharma and corporations in general, and I think it's about time someone exploited that, and that's what I intend to do throughout the next year or two.
Oh, it's really interesting, Tony. Yeah, we've spoken a bit about that in the past. Now, it's not something that I know an awful lot about, but I know you've been involved in it for quite some time. Yeah, that's really interesting, and we'll probably get back to that a bit later in the show. There's some good stuff coming up in chat, actually. Eric Von Essex has put that he thinks that getting strikes on YouTube should be compared to the World War II fighter pilots who got strikes. You know, they actually got respect. So how many strikes we have had get the same as an ace pilot, it says here. Yeah, very good one, that.
Yeah.
And people are saying good luck, Tony. Well, that's great, and things are definitely kind of picking up in direction. I know we had quite a lot of this year. It's been interesting because we had a few problems getting the whole thing on air. Then we got it on air, and it all became quite hard work. And I just sort of found this Spreaker platform. I think it was you that found it, actually, and it's really good. You know, we ironically tonight when we were trying out in your place, we couldn't get it working on your super duper studio kit, so we're back on the laptop here. But at least we're here. But I wanted to get onto the Yellow Vest protests that are spreading across Europe, and the Stasi, our Stasi in the UK and all over Europe. We are talking basically about the greater Stasi of the EU, the European Union Stasi, are going to use every dirty trick in their counterintelligence handbook to stop it. So the homogenisation and narrative controlling of the Yellow Vest movement is also underway in the UK. The state-backed Day Out for Masses, aka also known as the People's Assembly, are using the Yellow Vest to demand a general election. The state must control all sides. So this is really interesting that everyone's jumping on it now because the state has to control this. So I would suggest that the best way around that is to have goals just like they did in France. Basically, they were after very simple objectives, and the taxation on fuel was one of the main things which brought people out of the country into Paris to protest. And when you look at the majority of the people there, you can see that they are ordinary people, and then you see the lobbyists and the extremists coming in to take it over. So that's something that's going to be very interesting and something that we're going to report on in the weeks to come. But the state-controlled protests are a great day out. So the People's Assembly, what's that? It's a great day out as the worthy get bussed in or given placards and have a march up and down central London. Then they get taken home again, and everyone's safe. Everyone has a day out and nothing happens. Job done. So let's see what happens in the next few months as these protests start to actually take over from these state-backed protests. See what actually happens. Meanwhile, back in Windows Towers, Windows on the World, I've been shadow banned on Twitter and Facebook, and one of our shows has been removed from Facebook for abusive content. Now, this was just the show we did last week, which was really about globalist protests. So I don't know how that can be termed abusive. Maybe we've got people out there who are reporting us as abusive. What's interesting about Facebook is that I put things on there and I get 2 or 3 likes from the same people, and then I find out that nobody's actually seen it. And I was reliably informed by Francis Leader last week that yes, she's done a bit of research and we're definitely shadow banned. So does that mean we're doing something right? I think it does. It's quite irritating though, because I know that there's a much bigger audience out there for what we're doing, and the sort of depths of the shows, you know, the things that we go into and the subjects we tackle aren't really being tackled by a lot of other media. So do spread the word and get the word out. But let's have a look here. Yeah, the French have been shot as well. This is another thing. They've been shot with these dangerous firearms by Macron's mercenaries. They've been actually shot with these guns, and a lot of people have been shot in the face, and a few have lost eyes, as well as being gassed by Macron's mercenaries again. So in France, it's pretty draconian. Quite interesting to actually see how it compared with the Brussels protest, the one that was meant to be banned, because in Brussels they actually did use a water cannon, I think, in the end, but the demonstrators there were really not being attacked at all. And as I said, in the end, the riot police came off worse. There was a group that kind of came in, they would look like ancient provocateurs. But the protests will be hijacked by the state, and in the UK the protests will be linked to the new terror threat from MI5. Yes, those that voted to leave the European Stasi, the European Union, those are the people who are going to be demonised, just like happened in Brexit when people voted to leave. What happened straight after that? We had the Joe Cox murder, which was used just to demonise people who voted to leave. So expect a lot more of that. We're going to be told, I think, that there's going to be a rise of the extreme right, and we've dealt with that over the weeks and looked into it, and there doesn't seem to be any rise of the extreme right apart from in the offices of MI5 and going down into the think tanks and NGOs. Do you see a rise of the far right anywhere, Tony?
I don't, not round here, no.
Well, you'd think actually if there was going to be a place that was conservative and right wing, it would be Essex, really, wouldn't you? A lot of it is. Used to be anyway. Used to class itself as that, whatever that means. I don't really do right and left, as you know.
Yeah, most people around here are happy just to get on with it. They're not. I'm not getting any kind of activist information coming my way. Not like it used to be years ago in the late 1970s and that. It was all a lot different in Essex, but it was far worse then for right-wing business than it is now.
That's right, and it's an interesting thing because this narrative just came straight out of MI5. It was Mark Rowley who said it just before he resigned, that the new threat was going to be the right, extreme right. And of course, that's just demonising Brexit. But that does actually point out something very interesting. In other words, the people who are holding office haven't got a clue what's going on. They're just told what's going on. So I suppose it's up to us to tell them what's going on, because we actually are seeing things on the ground, as they like to say. But interesting stuff, because what we're going to get is the UK protests will be linked to this new terror threat from MI5. Basically anyone who wants to leave the European Union, and Tommy the Fraudster Forenames will also link himself to the subversion. Along with this, there will be other distractions like the fake left and the Soros-funded agitation groups. Now, as the protests spread, it is easy for the more observant to see what is real, what is fake, and what is state-backed terrorism against the population. That's the point I've been trying to make really in this show. So the Yellow Vest protests has now had an attempted hijacking by the climate change catastrophobics. This is another thing. So it's now been announced, someone sent me this, it was Ian, thanks Ian on Facebook for sharing the UK left-wing Yellow Vest protesters on Facebook, and they really want action on the climate crisis. So we can see where this is going to go. Now, moving on to the surveillance and depopulation section of the show, we're going to get on to this. A recent article in The Guardian by Kim Stanley Robinson, and supported in its propaganda by the Rockefeller Foundation and advocates of the global goals of United Nations Agenda 2030, and their assumption that 2/3 of the Earth's entire population will live in cities by 2050. Now get this was in The Guardian, and it's actually got the Rockefeller Foundation as signatories to it at the sides. Basically, it's total Rockefeller propaganda from the Rockefeller Foundation, published in The Guardian. So it says, there are now twice as many people as 50 years ago. But as E.O. Wilson has argued, they can all survive in cities. Here we go. They want everyone living in cities by 2050. That's the UN. And it says cities is supported by the Rockefeller Foundation. If we managed urbanisation properly, we could nearly remove ourselves from a considerable percentage of the planet's surface. Oh, sounds a bit like depopulation there. That's one of the first things it says in the article. Now that would be good for many of the threatened species we share this planet with, which in turn would be good for us, because we are completely enmeshed in the Earth's web of life. Well, not if we live in open concentration camps in smart cities radiated by 5G. I mean, this is the actual lunacy of it. When you actually look at what they're saying, they want everyone in smart cities in an open concentration camp and not able to go into the country. The article also links to the Global Footprint Network. And I've looked at this today. It's a shameless Agenda 21 sustainable development advocacy, which predicts how little we will all be able to have in the near future if the global criminals like the UN get their way and take over all of our resources and create artificial scarcity for all and global poverty by what they call redistribution of wealth. So basically, Useful idiots like Robinson are working on behalf of the mega-rich corporations and individuals who are the only ones to benefit from this planetary looting scheme sold as green and sustainable. So, anyway, it says here, right now we are not succeeding. The Global Footprint News Network estimates that we use up our annual supply of renewable resources by August every year. Now, if you look at this graph they've got on there, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever, right? It's completely insane. And there's no real reference to what they're talking about. What resources are they actually talking about? They're talking about renewables. Well, renewables aren't even resources, because renewables do not actually even do what they're meant to do. We've covered that in our show on the green energy agenda when we met the people who supply the national grid. And have a listen to that show, and that will put you right about renewables. So, in effect, it says we're stealing from future generations. So by being here and using resources, we're stealing from people in the future. I mean, this is the sort of insanity that they put out. So it says eating the seed corn, they used to call it. At the same time, we're pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at a rate that is changing the climate in dangerous ways. That's an absolute lie. No, we're not. CO2 has never been and will never be a problem. And the way to increase food production is to have more CO2. So we're being brainwashed to make ourselves extinct on behalf of billionaires, corporations and the UN. And this is where Extinction Rebellion, the fake protest backed by globalists, comes in. The victims of this cult are being told all the above. So see our shows, the last few ones we've done. Protest, Propaganda and Pantomime. I think that was the one that was banned as abusive on Facebook. Globalist Fake Revolution. Fake Protest, Extinction Rebellion. Those are 3 different shows. And what we now have is inside information from Extinction Rebellion on all their finances, who they are and what they're actually up to. And they're linked into globalism like you would not believe. It's incredible. So the ER sales, the Extinction Rebellion sales executives, are still using Greta Thunberg. This is this 15-year-old kid with Asperger's to address the world on behalf of their globalisation and depopulation plan. So the global They Live media networks carry on and state, Greta Thunberg, the 15-year-old Swedish activist, on Wednesday called for a global climate strike. The day of action is set for Friday at your school or anywhere you feel called. It doesn't make any sense. It's a bit Extinction Rebellion. Anywhere you feel that you ought to go, maybe, and lie down in the road for no apparent reason. But she's also telling kids to stay off school. I think the social services should get involved here. What do you think, Tony?
Well, I think there's like a bit more work like that, yeah.
Yeah. So Thunberg has made headlines for her now weekly school strikes to urge her home country to take bold climate action, made the call from Katowice, Poland, where she's attending the COP24 climate talks, now in their 2nd week. Unfortunately, she said in her video announcing the strike, as of now, there are no signs of commitment to climate action. Addressing world leaders at the climate conference, as the climate conference kicked off, Thunberg said, "We have not come here to beg the world leaders to care for our future. They have ignored us in the past and they will ignore us again. We have come here to let them know that change is coming, whether they like it or not. The people will rise to the challenge." Now, does this sound like a 15-year-old's written it to you?
Well, it don't sound good. No.
No, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, basically this is a form of child abuse, because what's happening here is she's being used as a front for this lobbying agenda, this globalist lobbying agenda. And how can a 15-year-old know anything about the climate?
I've got no idea. Most adults don't know a lot about it, do they? They're all taking the hearsay of other people. It's just like politics and the left and right. Everything's the same. I had it the other day about Europe and Brexit, and
Yeah.
Someone in a chat room posted that most people are uninformed about Brexit, especially those that voted leave. You know what I mean? And I had to kind of get back on that one and say, yeah, most people are uninformed on it, especially those that voted Remain. But what I'm trying to say is that whether it's politics, whatever it is, people do seem to be very, in general, uninformed. And I'm not talking to the listeners here, really. They're uninformed about everything, and they are either believing this person or that person. And as you often tell us, we're living in these false.
The post-truth world, really.
Yeah, but
yeah.
There's a false dichotomy constantly that we're doing battle in, and it's all based on who you like best, whose opinion you like best, rather than what you know about the subject. I find that with most things.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, what's fascinating to me, though, is that when you talk to people who are pro-EU, they don't know anything about it, like you're saying. They don't understand the origins of it, the pan-European movement, the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan, what the European Union was set up to do and who set it up. They think for some reason it's all about us being multicultural with Europe and all enjoying each other's countries, which has always happened. But the actual point of the European Union is to destroy boundaries, destroy nation states, and basically destroy culture. So all these people who think it's some kind of cultural enrichment and diversity about being in the European Union, it's the opposite of that.
Exactly.
It's the destruction of that. It's the fourth world, as we talked about a few weeks ago. The fourth world is the wilderness. It's basically a place with no boundaries and no meaning, and therefore no culture. So the European Union is about the destruction of all indigenous culture of the European countries. And they just don't seem to get this at all. They seem to be trading on the fact that, well, I want to go see my friends in Europe. Well, what's that got to do with anything? You know?
Yeah, why would that stop you?
I know.
We're not in bed with the Asians. You can go and see your friends out there anywhere and all the rest of the world. It's a bit of a nonsense, really, as you know. But there you go. People are determined to play these false dichotomies. They're determined to play both sides and keep the distraction and the fighting and the arguing going, no matter the subject. They won't research. I said to this fella the other day that it's really simple to see that the European Union is a criminal organisation. Just that alone makes me not want to be part of it. Why would you want to be part of a criminal organisation? But people don't want to enter the debate from there because they don't know what I mean, and they don't want to say, what do you mean? So you just get what you was referring to earlier, the ad hominem attacks that you're always talking about. You put it differently from, was it Socrates or someone that you was quoting earlier?
Yeah, basically when the argument's lost, slander begins.
Yes, this is what happens, see? Because people can't argue that point. They don't know. No one's told them the truth about them being a criminal organisation. The accounts, I know your listeners know it. They know it. So they don't have to go into it.
Well, this is the thing, but I find it fascinating actually because I have friends who are Remainers. You know, I don't really get into personal politics with a lot of people. There's no point. But I've explained this stuff to them, yet they still trot out that cliche. They still trot out the cliche that it's a big happy clappy family and they want to be diverse. And I think one example was something like, I want to see a kind of cultural diversity where we can have this sort of music with that sort of music, and it's got nothing to do with anything. Do you know what I mean?
That all my life.
I know, but it's just mental. It doesn't make any sense, and there's no research goes on into any of it, which is why these groups like Extinction Rebellion come up. I mean, when you think of what we've had, the Occupy movement taken over, we've covered this endlessly, really, and we did some good films on it. You know, basically government organised protests and globalist protests. This is why it's so interesting what's happening at the moment, because there were actually real people who came from rural France to complain about being looted for the fuel that they need to travel around. I mean, because France is a rural economy mainly. You know, there's loads of people live in the countryside in France. It's interesting actually because, yeah, the rich people in the UK have places in the country or live in the country. It's very expensive here to live in the country, but in France it's the opposite. It's the people who are working on farms or they work in rural economies basically. And so they're the people who came to protest. They are the people who brought the muck spreader and sprayed it all over one of the presidential palaces there. I'm not quite sure where it was. I think it wasn't actually a place where Macron was at the time, but they brought a muck spreader and sprayed it all over the building, and nobody stopped them. It was amazing. And then what they did was they bricked up the exit to the palace. They actually brought their own bricks and breeze blocks, and it was quite a good sight to see. You know, I can't imagine that happening over here actually, because you can't even get there because of these sort of tank traps and these big tons of metal that are in the way of any building in this country. You know, but there's something quite encouraging about that. But I think the main thing is not to get carried away with what's on the media, because it's going to be discredited on the likes of BBC and Sky, and we know what's going to happen. It's happened to all of these things. But I do think it is quite an interesting thing. I think it's one of the most interesting things that's happened for many years, because remember, we had the Occupy thing. That just turned into climate change, really. That was taken over. With general assemblies and all the rest of it. But once you know the template of this stuff, then you actually have a really good chance of making it work and usurping the stuff that's going on around it. But it takes very discerning people to do that, and I would say that the people who listen to these shows are pretty discerning. So I suppose if we spread the word, then there's a better chance of having an effect. So yeah, I was just to finish up with this Greta Thunberg, basically I made up a better headline than the one that they used on this Media Lens type outlet. I think it was actually, it was Democracy Now!, which I think I've now been banned from commenting on Facebook, which it's one of the most irritating Soros organisations under the sun. They virtue signal to what they think are minorities. They're subversive in every way. It's got this dreadful woman on it, Amy Goodman, who's this smiling liberal who's got this awful agenda. And when people look at it, they go, she seems very nice to me. I don't know what your problem with it is. And that's the real problem, isn't it, Tony? When you know how subversive something is, and it's vile the way it's subversive, and nobody sees it, and and it actually makes you look like a real extremist. I mean, that's quite funny in some ways. Yeah. But yes, I came up with a better title for the Greta Thunberg: 15-year-old victim of brainwashing cult under mind control by Soros Media. That's what I put on Democracy Now!, and I was very quickly banned by them and Media Lens. Maybe I got a bit too near the truth. But before we talk about Brexit catastrophism, because we hear this, looking at these ancient history, Tony, and catastrophism is basically the belief that the earth has gone through terrible traumatic events which have shaped the way it is now. In other words, cometary catastrophes, extreme weather events, all sorts of really turbulent things that have happened with over the thousands and millions of years of the earth, and basically the other side of that is uniformitarianism. And what we really have are people who believe that everything is stable. Well, nothing in this universe is stable, and the people who are in administration believe in uniformitarianism, and it goes into academia. So that's a big problem, I think, and something that sort of delineates the difference between our sort of media and the sort of media where people are basically following a narrative. And I think that breaking the left and right thing is so important now. It is the most important thing, and I think, again, the yellow vest thing has in a way done that, and that can be used. And if people have just one or two aims that are really solid to actually latch onto and don't get too dissipated, then I think it could be quite an interesting thing. But I've been watching it with a lot of interest, and also, as I say, looking at the subversion that's going on. So, yeah, have you got anything to add on that, Tony, before we move on?
No, I'm good. I think you covered that well.
Yeah. Eric Von Essex says, I don't think Democracy Now! Likes me. Democracy Now! I've put a link to your programme. Thanks, Eric, because I've been banned from them. Yeah, just keep hitting them with it, because they deserve it. They get plenty of money, so, yeah, they need to deal with us, really. Brexit catastrophism, yeah. This week's Fake News Media Comedy Award goes to The Sun, right, who warn against taking a holiday after March because of Brexit fears. Can you believe this? That was absolutely stunning. I think it's the best one this year, and we've had a few, haven't we? We've had quite a few Brexit fears this year. Yeah. Now, wait a minute. Let's get on to this. Metropolitan Police are trying out I call it facial recognition, right? Facial recognition. Well, I call it facial recognition because it's 97% inaccurate in the tests they've done so far.
Yeah, farcical,
Yeah. So facial recognition cameras are going to be installed in central London over the Christmas period. But as facial recognition cameras have proved 90% wrong in trials, and people on Crime Stoppers are not actually wanted. Now, see our show on that. I think you were on that show, weren't you, Tony? When we the Crime Stoppers takedown. Go to windowsontheworld.net and look at Crime Stoppers takedown, because basically Crime Stoppers was putting people on there who shouldn't be there. So if they're not wanted, what were they doing on there? We had hundreds taken off. And wait a minute, if they were wanted on Friday, why weren't they wanted on Monday morning? Basically, I wiped out all the crime in Kent with one email.
Windows solved it all.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? But that's just what happened because someone I knew was put on there and they shouldn't have been on there in the first place. But so the heads up is going to go at Crime Stoppers. So the facial recognition. Can you imagine what's going to happen now? There's going to be thousands more people wanted on Crime Stoppers after we got it down to 10 pages, isn't there?
Yeah. Is it true or just a rumour though that Kent Police actually bought you a Batman cape for that?
That's just a rumour, Tony. I mean, the thing is that I've been hearing from several other people who've been victims of Kent Police. And yeah, they've got themselves a nice little racket going down there, you know. I mean, they have got it. As far as organised crime goes, I think it's on a par with any other crime syndicate that I've ever looked into. I think it's better though, actually, because they've got a much better front, Medway Police Station.
Yeah. So you've got all sorts of people walking around London this time of the year now, then waiting to be accosted because they've been falsely recognised as some sort of a criminal or whatever from a database, from a camera, and they're going to have their Christmas shopping interrupted. Is that the prediction?
Well, yeah, and it says people basically. Let me get into the article. It says Scotland Yard is to train facial recognition cameras on Christmas shoppers for the first time. Well, wait a minute. I mean, most people are photographed all the time in the West End, aren't they? But these facial recognition cameras are known not to work. So what difference is it going to make? A mobile deployment of the controversial surveillance software will include covering areas in the vicinity of Soho, Piccadilly Circus and Leicester Square, and will be used overtly, the Met said, with a uniformed presence and information leaflets available to the public. So we're going to give you leaflets with, have you seen this person? And newsflash, it's you. Our privacy campaigners have labelled the technology authoritarian. Met Police said the test would run for around 8 hours on each day, and all faces on the database used during the deployment are people wanted by police and the courts. Now this is interesting because what we found with Crime Stoppers was a lot of the people on there wouldn't have known they were wanted by the courts because they were on a warned list. And a lot of these cases now, if you plead not guilty, will take up to 2.5 years to go to court.
Wow.
So you have to phone in the court every day if you're on a warned list. So how can you possibly do that if you're working? It's ridiculous. So that means that people could get picked up by the police when they're doing a Christmas shopping and have no clue that they're wanted whatsoever. And then what's going to happen? You know, you've got potential detainees over the Xmas break, you know, because they can keep you for 24 hours, can't they? However, yeah, keep out of the West End. If you've got any magistrates' court fines, I think is the advice there. Twitter trolls UK versus alleged Twitter trolls in Russia. This is interesting. It's called the Integrity Initiative, and it's a non-partisan programme. And basically what they are is a bunch of Twitter trolls, right? But masquerading under the banner of being journalists. The Integrity Initiative, it says here, is a non-partisan programme of the Institute for Statecraft, another non-partisan charity which promotes good governance. So they're a charity, all these charities and NGOs doing all this good. It's incredible, isn't it? The Institute tracks global trends and provides independent support to enable leaders to address the challenges and opportunities which rapid change presents to their countries or organisations. The Institute provides decision takers and policymakers with reliable alternative solutions to address rapidly evolving threats, challenges and opportunities based on many years' combined experience, working on real-world challenges with government bodies, with armed forces and other agencies of national security, with international organisations, with the corporate world and with academia. So basically what we've got here is a setup which is linked in to everything that's important within the state as a propaganda arm of the state. That's all it is. So basically a bunch of change agents being the change that they want you to see. Now, well, that's all right then, I suppose. We're safe, and the Integrity Initiative is a charity just like Hope Not Hate and Crime Stoppers, so we're all right. There's nothing to see, no problem. But the Integrity Initiative, it says here, looks specifically at the use of disinformation and malign influence to undermine the values of democratic societies. So wait a minute, why can they take this upon themselves to do that? Because they're not even part of the intelligence services, but they're acting as if they are. So yeah, it looks specifically at the use of disinformation. Now, this is where the irony comes in. What it seems to be doing quite well, yes, is propaganda. All right, its job is propaganda, and mainly on Twitter, right? So that really makes it look more and more ridiculous when they say that. But since the programme was set up in 2015, it says here, the UK and the democratic world in general have continued to be targeted by disinformation activity, including in particular from Russia. Now, it seems to really focus on Russia. It says, for example, Russia put out various false stories about the shooting down of the Malaysian airliner MH17 over Ukraine in July 2014, even after the official inquiry reported that Russia was responsible. Well, what do you mean, our official inquiry? Yeah. So ours is the only one that matters, right? So if the Russians turn around and say, no, it didn't happen like that, well, that's disinformation then, isn't it?
That's right.
Now, isn't this a bit like the old communist bloc? You know, isn't this what we accused them of in the Cold War?
Yes, exactly the same.
Yeah.
The pot and the kettle.
Exactly. And despite the UK government pointing the finger of blame at Moscow for the attempted assassination of Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia in March 2018, supported by many countries and which led to a mass expulsion of Russian diplomats, the Russian authorities issued at least 47 different versions as to what happened. Well, I don't remember that happening, Tony. I remember them saying, where is the evidence? That's what I remember them saying. I remember them asking publicly for the evidence. So this is all absolute rubbish. So is that more or less than the BBC? I only remember them saying it was nonsense and asking for proof. Exactly, the Russians thought it was laughable. And the main story was that they had reported it to a relative. This is Sergei Skripal and his daughter. They actually reported to a relative, and this was on Sky News on the 19th of March, I believe, because somebody didn't believe me. They were talking about the Skripal poisoning, and I said, well, they got food poisoning from the pub, and they go, oh, Mark, you and your ridiculous conspiracy theories, have you got anything to back this up? I said, yes, Sky News, 19th of March. Huge silence, because these people think Sky News is a trusted source, you see. It's hilarious, isn't it? But so the NGOs, charities and these lobbying groups which infiltrate and influence whole countries never stop, and the subversives will be all over the yellow vest movement. So again, be aware. Absolutely incredible, that. So yeah, that's something that I found today. And once you start looking into these organisations, you just realise that when you compare this to what we were told about the old Soviet Union, we are now living in it. We are absolutely living in it. I mean, it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, it's aesthetically more pleasing, but it's basically the same system, yeah.
I think you've hit a nail on the head there, Tony. This is what Agenda 21's all about. It's about everything on the surface looks better. Everything looks more affluent. It looks more clean. But underneath it, there's a entirely different picture going on. So it's a fake truth. It's a post-truth world. Nothing is as it appears to be. And the actual looting that's going on in the economy now is incredible. And the property prices, the property boom, and the actual the alleged scarcity of property, and the selling off to offshore investors of all of this new housing that's being built is part of that. It's all part of this so-called regeneration. We talk about it all the time. But I just wanted to finish off with this one, actually. It's quite an interesting story. The Swedish Green Party politicians in Eslöv have issued an apology after the local council group suggested forcing out Swedes critical of multiculturalism from the area, saying the proposals were just satire. Now, they're trying to backtrack on this, but this is definitely the policy in Sweden. Now, there's a great book that came out called The New Totalitarians, which I've only read part of, but that tells you what was happening in Sweden during the 70s and 80s and why Sweden is actually a communist country, but the actual template for that is the same everywhere. That was rolled out in Sweden, and the thing is about this is that the multiculturalism thing has been seen through there, because basically you can't have mass immigration, because the mass immigration actually is to the detriment of the people who you're meant to be looking after, which are the people who are already in the country. So basically, it's not multiculturalism. The migration pact that the UN want to bring in 59 million into Europe is nothing to do with that. It's about the destruction of everything that people think is now normal, and the degeneration of everything that they thought was theirs. So that's really interesting. But it says here, taking a stab at the anti-mass mass migration, the Sweden Democrats, this is the Swedish party, Lars Alfors, chairman of the local Greens, said, there is another party that wants to persuade immigrants to relocate. We think that if you do not enjoy multiculturalism, there should be an opportunity to give a helping hand to move. So what they're saying is, if you don't like the people and the amount of people that are coming in, go and live in another country, which is kind of a bit ironic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to do probably another show next week as well and keep going over Christmas. And I've got a lot of ancient history stuff that I want to start bringing back, because we did one a couple of weeks ago and it was absolutely fascinating. And I was talking about the ancient history of Australia and how that ties in to what we're told, and the out of Africa theory, which has been debunked. So I want to get more and more into that over the next few weeks, because I've got a backlog of research, and this is all a big part of the bigger picture. And if you do want to book one of our shows, go to windowsontheworld.net. You can book myself, Piers Corbin and Sandy Adams, and we do a whole afternoon of talks, and they've been really well received all over the country. But the main point of this is that the people that you meet, because they're all doing interesting things. And we're getting this, I suppose you could say, we're intelligence gathering, for real intelligence, not the stuff that comes out the security services of people who sit in offices. This is real intelligence from the ground, what's going on in the country as we speak. So, Tony, have you got anything else you'd like to say to the people in chat and the listener out there?
Well, I'd just like to say it's nice to be talking to your audience again, and it's good to hear that many people are using Spreaker and not YouTube, because that means people are voting with their feet and doing the right thing, getting away from stuff that ain't working for you. I know it's not really easy with YouTube to get away from it altogether, but hopefully in time, if enough people keep using alternative platforms, we'll get something that's as good as what YouTube used to be, working for us all again. But in the meantime, people need to do exactly what you're doing and be as independent as possible. Market your own stuff, and always you're relying on that listener to spread the word and to get other people to listen and to contribute, hopefully, as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, the Spreaker platform is great for us because it means we're entirely independent, and I was very, very worried with these strikes on YouTube, because we were at the time very dependent on YouTube, and I don't want to be. I think it's great that people out there are tuning in and listening to the shows, and what's very encouraging is the reach of it. The reach of the shows is far beyond what I thought it was. I mean, I get people contacting me from all over the world now. There's a chap who listens in the Philippines who was talking to me the other week. Basically, he was talking about sound levels, got a few problems with the sound levels. He said he was trying to listen on his iPad on the train. And he said because sometimes the volume levels do go up a bit up and down because of the places that we broadcast from. But that's great that people are actually tuning in and they send great information. So I think it's Roy in the Philippines. Yeah, say hello to Roy from Windows on the World. If you're listening, I'm sure you are. And yeah, the quality of the information that we get, I think, is really good because of the standard of the research that we do, and the stuff that we put out can't really be argued with. Well, it can be argued with, but often not successfully, because we're putting out fact-based stuff, and that's what the opposition don't like. That's why we get these so-called trolls, because what's really highly amusing about it is that all they do is come back with ad hominems. I mean, when they were trying to have a go at our mini Ice Age video, the only thing they could say was that they didn't like our Bing Crosby sweaters. Well, I had to remind them that Piers didn't have a Bing Crosby sweater on. I think he was wearing a Pierre Cardin top. But my actual shirt came from Nepal. It was from Kathmandu. So I had to put him right on that. And of course, him being a fake wet liberal, that would have been a mortal insult to him, because he was having to go at my multicultural T-shirt, and calling it Bing Crosby. It was aligning my ethnic shirt with white supremacy, Tony.
Yeah.
This is absolutely outrageous, isn't it?
Yeah, shocking. I think you look rather fetching in that, mate.
Well, it's a good job because I've only got 2 shirts, Tony. I mean, I travel around quite a lot. I've got a red one and I've got that black one, Very good, actually, those.
Yeah, and sorry, and knowing a bit about technology as well, what you do is, not many people do it the way you do it. You're here, there and everywhere. You're chasing the stories, different people, different locations. It's not easy without a studio to actually get a reliable sound setup, it's not. You do pretty damn well, I think. So, well done.
Yeah, I mean, I try and keep it simple. I think that's the thing. I was going to try and find the exit music because it's actually disappeared off this desktop because we put it onto the studio desktop, but it doesn't really matter. I can just use our normal intro outro. In fact, I might give someone the last word here before we go. We did that last week though. Hang on, yes, that was Wayne Fontana. Oh yeah, stay tuned for these things because I'm putting out some documentaries, everybody, and they'll be available on the website. I'm working on a project at the moment which I hope people out there will be very interested in, which is about the ancient history of Smithfield, and in particularly the heretics that were burned in Smithfield in London. We've covered it on a few shows and there's stuff in the archive about it, but I'd like to get more into ancient history, and of course your donations do help us keep going, because I'm travelling, as Tony says, here, there and everywhere, and I decided to do this and put everything else to one side. And it's great that people do throw a few quid into the pot because it helps with the petrol money, it helps us to get out to events, and it helps to pay the internet bill, so thanks a lot for that. And yes, in conclusion, I'd just like to say that in the new year there will be lots more information coming out on Windows on the World that I've got at the moment sort of backlogged, and I'm hoping to put all that together over the next week so that when we hit with the new shows in the new year, we're going to have some amazing information and a great variety of information. We've been covering a lot of stuff on the fake globalism protests, these things that have been happening in the last few weeks, because they're extremely important. But I'd like to thank everyone for listening tonight, and it's good night from me, and it's good night from Tony.
Cheers everyone, you have a good week.
Thanks a lot everybody, and we will see you very, very soon on Windows on the World.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and programme stream at windowsontheworld.net.